Hi, welcome to our training on strategies for behavioral success. My name is Leah Dietrich. I'm the program supervisor for many amazing classrooms in York, Adams, and Franklin counties. Today, our purpose is just to give you a toolkit for success when dealing with students that have behavioral needs. We want to just really thank you for joining us this summer. We want to be able to give you that toolkit to have some basic understanding of what these needs are and how to support students with those needs. First thing we'll talk about is our learning objectives today. We're going to learn preventative strategies to support safety, understand signals and triggers. We're going to learn about the ABCs of behavior and reinforcement, and we'll also learn some strategies for responding to behaviors of concern. So the first thing we want to always keep in mind is we want to always expect that behavior could happen. Even if the student you're working with isn't a student that presents with behavioral needs, we always want to expect that maybe it could. You never know. We're all people and we all engage in different behavior at different times. So we want to be ready for those occurrences. And also many of the things that we'll learn today are just general good strategies to keep yourself safe, to keep students safe, regardless if behavior is present or not. So with that in mind, how do I keep myself and others safe? The first thing to keep in mind is we want to have awareness always at our forefront. Know where the exits are in the classroom, and exits change all the time. Those paths from where you're at to where the door is at or to where the next table is at is always changing. Someone moves a chair, the wheelchair rolls across the room, someone moves a student from point A to point B. Maybe there's carts that move. Maybe there's a pillow that fell and now it's on the floor. So know where those paths are because they change continually, and also know where the students are. Whether they're up and walking, moving around, whether a staff member is guiding someone from point A to point B. So to help really support this idea of awareness, you'll want to practice a habit of glancing up at the room frequently. And when I say frequently, I mean about every 30 to 60 seconds. That's how quickly things can change. So if you do need to move with your student to somewhere else in the room for safety, or maybe even the alarm goes off or something like that, and you do need to exit, you want to know where those paths are. So make sure you're glancing up and do it frequently. The next thing that we'll talk about is positioning for safety. And I asked Gail to come on over to help me out with this section. So we're going to take a moment to stand up. And Gail here is my student today. And if I see, like a great student. So if I'm working with Gail, I always want to approach her within her visual field. And like I said earlier, this is not only for students with behavioral needs, these are general strategies for safety. So when I approach Gail, I don't want to come back here. Are you ever at home when someone in your house comes up to you and they startle you from behind? My reaction is to go like this. We don't want that, right? We don't want to startle anyone. So if I'm approaching Gail, I'm always going to approach within her visual field. So often from the side or really anywhere that she can see me. Now, keep in mind, if you're with a student who has visual needs or other sensory needs, they may not be able to use that peripheral vision. So know that first, have an understanding of what those needs are and what their visual field is. In addition to being where she can see me when I'm approaching, is I want to face the same direction as her. So Gail's facing that way. I'm facing this way too. I could turn my head to see her. I can angle my body a little bit, but in general, I'm facing in the same direction that Gail is facing. We want to protect our midlines. I want to avoid face-to-face positioning. So if Gail is turned towards me, I don't want to approach her right here. All of this right here, if someone grabs or bites, we want to protect this area. Okay, that's why we're staying side to side. So again, right here from the side, we're always protecting our midline. Also, we want to use distance as appropriate. Right now, I am pretty close to Gail. If she were to reach out her arm, she could reach me, grab me very easily. Now, does this mean I'm going to step this far away from every student I'm walking with? No, it's just a point of awareness. So if you do have a child that's a little bit agitated or might grab, use that little bit of distance if it's safe to do so in your support for that student. Always keep that distance piece in mind. Also, lastly on this point, sitting on the floor. If you need to sit on the floor or would like to sit on a floor to engage with a student, to play with them or whatever that be, this might sound a little bit silly, but make sure you can get up. If you're not going to be able to get up from the floor easily without using furniture, you might not want to sit on the floor. Maybe you'll sit on a stool or a chair so you can be close to the student, but you don't necessarily want to be on the floor. You want to be able to get up and away pretty quickly. The next piece is looking at safe physical support. So many of our students will need physical prompting in some way or other types of physical support. So if you have a little one and you need to be holding their hands, maybe walking through the hallway, you're going to want to use hand under hand. Now remember, Gail is my student here, so my hand is underneath her hand is on top. If she were to go to bite, her hand is going to be the one that goes towards her mouth. She's going to be a lot less likely to bite her own hand. If my hand were on top, I'm heading in, and we don't want that to happen. So hand under hand for holding hands if that's needed. Physical prompting. Many of our students require physical prompting for engagement in tasks. Now notice while I'm doing this, first off, I'm using the hand that's closer to Gail. I don't want to cross over this way to provide that support because I'm opening up my midline for that grab. We always want to use the hand closer to the student. So with this, I want to use a hand under hand type of support. So if I'm helping her get to something, I'll put my hand right here under her forearm to help her engage. Maybe she just needs a little tap behind the elbow. I want to really avoid joint areas. I want to avoid her elbow and her wrist. Maybe she does need support right with her hand, that's okay. But we want to use that hand under hand support. We want to avoid grabbing or pulling. So try to really avoid this. I think it's the easiest thing, especially if you have kids. You're just so used to kind of grabbing and bringing them along, right? We want to avoid that. We want to avoid using our thumbs when possible. So anytime, again, that open palm, we want to keep that thumb tucked in, hand under hand, or nice guided support in some way. Again, using that hand that's closer to the student. Okay, super important. We'll keep you safe. We'll keep the student safe. That does not ever mean that you're not going to need to use both hands for support. Sometimes there might be lifting or guiding or other types of support, but whenever possible, we want to be mindful of those thumbs, be facing the same direction, and be using that arm that's closest to the student. Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to dive in to our next section. Clothing considerations. So first thing, wear closed-toed shoes. Not saying you have to, but it's going to be the safest option for you. If you have a student that might stomp a little bit, or even if you have someone in a wheelchair and it just moves around and you didn't expect it to turn a little bit, those closed shoes are going to protect your toes from injury. You want to avoid loose jewelry, necklaces that are dangly earrings. Those are things that are really easy to grab onto or pull. If you have a lanyard, make sure it's a breakaway lanyard and not one like mine right now. If someone were to pull it, this would not be a good one to wear. You want one that's going to break and release easily, or maybe one of those that just attaches to your clothing. Avoid wearing hoods or shirts or jackets. So a hood is really easy to be pulled. So if someone were to come up from behind, we don't want to give that extra fabric to grab onto. Be cautious of buttons and zippers. Buttons and zippers can easily, if someone grabs, it's harder to help them to safely release that because they can get entangled in that. Also, they could rip or pull apart. If someone were to grab your shirt and it's a button shirt, those will pop off a lot easier than just having, a solid closed shirt. Layers can be helpful. If someone grabs your sweater, it's easy to just remove that sweater if you have another layer underneath. I realize it's summer and most of us aren't wearing sweaters or layers. It's just something to think about. And also pulling your hair back. If you have longer hair, it can be super helpful. If you were to have a student that were to grab or put their fingers, through your hair like that, having it back in a ponytail can be supportive of that need. Looking at, so those are some things that we talk about. They are good things to have in mind just in general at all times. They're not must-dos, but they are really should-dos, if at all possible, to support students and again, to keep yourself and them safe. And we're going to dive now into some other preventative strategies. These are things that it's really helpful for us to be mindful of, because if we're aware of things like signals and triggers, it helps us intervene or support a student early and maybe prevent some other behavior that could occur. So signals and triggers. A trigger is something that happens in the environment that can be a trigger for behavior. So I don't know about you, but there's some triggers for me, right? If I'm outside and I hear a really loud noise, I might jump. my hands go up. I might even give a little yell, depends, right? That loud noise was a trigger for me, you know, oh my gosh, like what was that? So think about students at school and what some of those triggers could be, the things that if they happen, a behavior may occur following that trigger happening. Alarms, fire alarms is a common one for us in schools. Asking a student to do work, maybe a peer teasing another student, a crowded space, having to wait in line. Think about those things. Can you think of what some triggers might be in the school environment that if this happened, maybe there's a likelihood that it could trigger some behavior there following soon after. So a trigger is in the environment. That's something that the student does not do. The next thing is a signal. And a signal is something that the student themselves does. And this signal can indicate that behavior might occur. Signals are unique to students. And when a student provides you with these signals, or sometimes it's called a precursor behavior, it's saying to you, hey, I'm getting a little bit agitated. Things might ramp up just a little bit. I may engage in some other behavior. So some signals could be pacing, the student saying that they're mad, their fists clenching, maybe the student is making a noise. And again, it's unique to individual students. So as you get to know students that you're with a little bit more, and if you do have a student that has some behavioral needs, you will learn over time, or you may even see in their paperwork, what some of their signals would be. And again, real important for these signals and triggers. If that trigger happens, or if you see a signal occurring within a student, it's going to really help you be able to call for help. If needed, it will also help you be able to support and intervene for the student. And hopefully we could, help them out and maybe avoid the problem behavior that could occur next. Calling for help. This is super, super important. So we want you to know that you are well supported. You are not alone. You have a team that is here both within the classroom and beyond the classroom. So anytime a behavioral need presents, you need assistance of any kind or are unsure of how to respond, call for help. It's better to call early and get help that's needed than to not call at all. So I rather you call for help a little bit too much than decide to not call for help, and then you find yourself in a little bit of a sticky situation where you wished you would have called. Some ways for doing this, it could be as simple as calling the teacher's name or a coworker's name. Some classrooms, if you're in a classroom that maybe has more behavioral needs represented, you might pick up a code word, sprinkles, cupcakes, yellow bus, I don't know. Change it and change it often, but it might be a word that your team agrees upon, that if someone says this word, here's the people that will come to assist. But we want you to have that confidence that you are able to call for help, you're able to call for assistance at any time, and there will be a team, whether within your classroom or from outside of that classroom, to come and support you. With calling for help, know what the plan is and who your team is. Discuss with your immediate classroom team what this looks like and who will respond. And if you are someone who is responding, making sure that whenever a team member calls for help, that a response happens every single time. There's no boy who cries wolf here. Every time a call for help is made, the team responds. Okay. So far we've learned how to be safe. We've learned about signals and triggers, and we've learned that we can call for help. The next piece of this is going to be learning a little bit about the ABCs of behavior. And why does this matter? Well, a couple of reasons. When a behavior occurs, this framework is going to help you to be able to just think back on that behavior a little bit. What was going on before the behavior occurred? And what did that behavior look like? And then how did I and maybe other people respond to that behavior? It will also give you a foundation for if you are reading a student's behavior plan, for what some of that language in that plan means, because you'll notice some really distinct categories outlined in that plan of antecedent, behavior, and consequence. So when we say these ABCs, antecedent, behavior, consequence, what do we mean? Antecedent is something that happens before a behavior. And in most cases, I'm going to say immediately before that behavior. A behavior is what a person does. And for a behavior, it has to be something that I could see. So if I were to walk in a classroom and you said to me, Joe wrote his name, I know exactly what that could look like. Or Joe walked forward, or Joe waved. I can tell you, what those things would look like. If I walked in and someone said Joe's bored, I don't know what bored looks like. But if they said Joe put his head down on the desk and covered his eyes, I know what a head down on a desk and eyes covered looks like. So behavior, what is it that the person does? And consequence, a consequence is what happens immediately after the behavior. And not just like 2 hours down the road, immediately after that behavior. One of the pieces that we want to talk about in looking at that consequence portion of behavior is reinforcement. Reinforcement is a consequence which increases the future likelihood of a behavior occurring again in the future. Pretty wordy. So basically we learn antecedent before behavior. Behavior is what the individual does. Consequence after behavior. A reinforcement is something that happens after the student engages in behavior, and because of its presence or delivery, causes that behavior to potentially increase in the future. We're going to talk about some scenarios and get a picture of what reinforcement really is. So this scenario 1, Cami loves staff attention. Cami's our student. Cami is asked to get out her paper and pencil. Cami gets out her paper and pencil. Mrs. D gives Cami a high five. So looking at this scenario, our antecedent, Cami is asked to get out her paper and pencil. Behavior, Cami gets out that paper and pencil. Consequence, Mrs. D gives Cami a high five. Way to go, Cami. So if Cami really, really loves attention, what is likely to happen in the future if she's asked to get something out? When we think about reinforcement, we're calling reinforcement something that increases the future likelihood of behavior occurring. Well, in the scenario, if Cami loves attention and she's given that high five after she gets that pencil and paper out, she's pretty likely to be able to take that paper and pencil out again if Miss D asks her in the future, because good things happen when I do what I'm asked with Mrs. D. Second scenario, Mrs. D asks Cami to complete her work. There's your antecedent. Cami rips up her paper. Behavior. Mrs. D says, take a little break. Consequence. So in this scenario, what is likely to happen in the future when Cami's asked to do work? If I'm asked to do work and I rip up my paper and I get a break, I'm not really looking forward to this work in the future. I don't want to do it. And last time I was asked to do work and I ripped up my paper, I was given a break. Cami might just rip up that paper next time she's asked to do a similar type of work if she doesn't want to do that work. Because in this scenario, what did she get? What was that reinforcing factor? That thing that potentially is increasing this behavior? Mrs. D letting her take a little break. So again, it's something to be mindful of. Our actions have an impact on student behavior. Next scenario, Cami's thirsty. Cami asks for a drink. Staff give Cami a drink. Our antecedent, she's so thirsty. Behavior, she asks. Consequence, staff gives Cami a drink. What's likely to happen next time Cami's thirsty? Hopefully she asks for a drink. In this scenario, she asked for that drink and she got that drink. She got her needs met through communicating, and that's what we do want to see. We want to see that positive behavior reinforced. So if I ask and I get it, that drink will serve as that reinforcer for the student. So looking at this idea of reinforcement, I kind of like to phrase it in another way, because often, we think, okay, so, Cami is really, really motivated for music. So she's going to work for music. So Cami you ask her to do a task, she does her task, and you sing your song together, right? That's great. But will Cami always like that song? Will that song always serve as a reinforcer for Cami? So one way to look at reinforcement, and one thing to think about, is that in order for something to be reinforcing, the student needs to want it bad enough to change their behavior to get it. Okay, so I want to think about my favorite example of something that could serve as a reinforcer, and it's Thanksgiving dinner. When you sit down for Thanksgiving dinner that morning, like you know it's coming, maybe you're the one cooking. If you're not cooking, you're smelling the smells from the kitchen, right? You are so motivated for that turkey dinner, for the stuffing, all the fixins, right? You're waiting for it all morning. You're so motivated for it. So when that Thanksgiving dinner lands on the table and it's time, what is everyone's behavior in the household? Antecedent, food on table. Behavior. People come right to that table. They're sitting. Hands go from plate to mouth and chew, right? Day one, that turkey meal is a huge reinforcer, right? Day two, you're psyched for that turkey sandwich. Day three, you're pretty excited about turkey soup, turkey leftover soup. Day four, you're still kind of excited for that sandwich. You only had one, you had some turkey soup. Day five rolls around and like turkey dinner is just not happening anymore. So that turkey dinner that was such a highly motivating thing in the beginning, is that still going to be motivating now on day five? So that song for the student, they really love If You're Happy and You Know It. Well, after singing, if you're happy and you know it for the sixth or seventh time, you know, for some kiddos, they can keep going on that. For others, they can't. Because why? You know, you got sick of the turkey. I don't want to listen to the same song on the radio 10 times, even if it's my favorite, right? So how do we make this exciting? How do we get the student, when they sit down with you, to want them to do what you're asking them to do? How do we use what reinforcement is and the value that it can hold appropriately? Think of what you have available. Get to know the student, have fun, and be creative. So say the student's really into balls. They love bouncy balls. They love catching balls. They like to bounce the ball. This ball does a whole lot of things. You can throw it fast. You can throw it slow. You can throw it up in the air and let it drop. This ball spins on the table. The ball bounces on the table. The ball rolls up the student's arm and it rolls down the student's arm. This ball happens to have a smiley face, so it could even talk. What can you can do so many things. I happen to have a second ball. Now I can juggle. I won't do that. It'll be embarrassing. The balls will all fall. What can you do to make your time with the student fun and engaging? Maybe you only have a couple items that are identified as reinforcers. Well, how do we not make those boring? How do we make them fun and engaging? Use what you have, be fun, bring out your personality, be engaging, and students will light up. They will want to be with you. They will want to engage with you, and you're going to see the behaviors you want to see, them working and engaging with you, instead of maybe some of the other things, those less desirable behaviors that we're trying to teach, you know, maybe better ways of engaging. So use reinforcement, use what you have and have fun. Don't be afraid to have fun. So what happens if behavior does occur? We talked about reinforcement and how we can use it, you know, to shape and support the behaviors we want to see. First is know the student's plan. If you do have a student that has some behavioral needs identified as part of their educational plan, ask the teacher you're working with, can I please read the student's behavior support plan? It's important for you to know what's in there. Keep in mind that it is a confidential student document, so the only place you should be looking at it is in the classroom. The only people that you should be discussing it with are members of that student's immediate team, you know, for planning and learning purposes to support that student well. But know the plan. If there's words in that plan you're not familiar with, that's okay. Ask. If your team doesn't know, you know, there's others of us in the building who are happy to support you in knowing and implementing that student's plan. Responding to behavior. So this is just a very general toolkit of some things that you can do. We talked first and foremost, we do not expect anyone here to be behavior experts, and we want you to use your team. So you are going to call for help if you feel behavior escalating at all. But here's some tools that maybe if the behavior plan doesn't identify what to do in the situation, or you have a student who does not have a behavior plan and is presenting with some challenging behavior, here's a toolkit of a few things that you can do to help support that student. The first thing is to support communication. We all engage in behavior because we want to get something or to avoid something. And how do you let other people know what you need, what you want, or what you want to get away from? You communicate. If you can't do it yourself or get it yourself, you communicate with them, you use your words. Well, in this case, we're going to help students request what they want or need. So you see that little bit of a signal. Remember those things a student does to say behavior might occur. Help them to request what they want or need if you know what they may want or need. You want to make sure that you're supporting them in responding based on their communication system. Do they use words verbally? Do they speak? Do they use pictures on a device or some sort of exchange? Do they use sign or gestures? Help support them in that. And in this moment, if a student is showing you that they're a little bit agitated, they may need a little bit more support than when they're not agitated. So if you've seen this student ask for a crayon when they need a crayon, when they're calm and engaged, and now they have like work in front of them and they're showing you that they're a little bit agitated, and you think what they want is that crayon, you're going to be prompting them and supporting them in that communication a little bit more now than you did before. So you might hand them that picture of the crayon that they can hand back to you. You might say, ask for a crayon, or can I please have a crayon, or crayon, whatever that is for the student, and have them repeat it. And then you can deliver them that crayon. Okay, so what does communication look like for that student? How can you support them in the moment? And often meeting that need early supports that student in being able to continue in the work that they're doing or whatever task they're engaged in, instead of engaging in challenging behavior. Another thing to keep in mind, we want to tell the student what you want them to do. So if you think the student is likely to follow a direction from you or might respond from a little bit of distraction, tell them exactly what it is you want them to do. Be brief about it. Tell them, be really specific. Some examples: walk with me, give the envelope to Mrs. So-and-so, put the item in, show me ready hands, come with me, walk to room 2, get your coat. They're all very simple, very positive statements that we're making. If the student is not likely to respond in this moment, or you don't think they will, you don't have to ask at all. If you ask them to do something, as a support, you thought maybe they would follow your directive and they didn't, that's okay. You tried it, it didn't work, move on, and that's okay too. One thing that we want to consider though, when we are prompting a student to do something, is we want to avoid telling the student what not to do. And we also want to avoid using extraneous language or threats. So we don't want to say things like, stop yelling. Now isn't the time for drawing. I'm not going to tell you again, you know what the directions are. If you would have just listened the first time. If you don't complete this in the next minute, there is no break time for you. Statements like this, they're not supportive. And quite frankly, they're not really likely to get the student to do what you want them to do. And it doesn't support that positive rapport with students. So just really think about that language, practice the language that you want to use with students, practice that positive, I want to tell you exactly what I want you to do. I don't need to add all this other stuff in there that may not be as supportive and support follow through for students. Sometimes, especially if you have a student who's highly escalated, those other two things you're not likely to use them if you have a student who's highly escalated. And if you do have a student that's really engaging in maybe some aggressive or behaviors that you would be concerned for some safety, best strategy is to call for help and monitor for safety. And remember, as we said earlier, call for help early. And we want your team there to be able to support you, and they may even step in and take the lead on some of that. If you are one of the individuals that is supporting in a situation where behavior is escalated, sometimes the best thing as you just monitor for safety is you want to minimize attention to the student. So we're not going to give direct eye contact. We're still looking to monitor, but we're not giving that direct eye contact. We want to avoid talking to the student or with others. This is not the time for casual conversation. You might need to communicate something of, hey, move that chair over. Something to notice to support safety and to support progression through this behavior, but we're not going to have any additional conversation at this time until the student's back and ready to start engaging again. Recovery. So after a behavior, we talked about what to do, you know, what the behavior is, what are some strategies for after the behavior. But another thing to consider is when a student is finished engaging in behavior, they may not be all the way back to calm, even though they seem to be back to calm. So some other strategies for safety and success immediately following that behavior, as we want to offer only safe objects to the student, crayons, a plush toy instead of maybe a hard toy. Think about things that aren't pointy or not hard. So if they were to engage either with themselves with that item or maybe to throw it, that the impact of that item would not harm other people or themselves. You also want to consider spacing. If you bring a student back into a classroom and they had just engaged in some significant behavior, you may want to provide some space between peers. If it's a student who's likely to grab, let's keep them out of that grab range of that other student. You're not going to do this forever. You're just going to do this into the point where that student is ready to re-engage in instruction fully with the classroom and within their peers in a safe manner. If you're not sure, ask the teacher, ask the other support team members that you have. Lastly, continue to reinforce positive behavior. Reinforcement never ends. So, you know, especially following a behavior, if a student is engaging in behavior you want to see, be mindful of saying, hey, thanks for walking with me. You know, give that little high five if appropriate. If they do use edibles, offer those little pieces of edible when they're engaging in those behaviors you want to see. We're not holding a grudge. There's not a big consequence. Behavior's over. What I want to do now is teach you and help you learn those positive behaviors. And if they're engaging in that positive behavior, let's honor that and support them in that. All right, so you've just gone through a mini boot camp, if you will, of all things behavior. So we're just going to go ahead and recap some of that real briefly. First thing, we always want to keep in mind safety. We want to be aware of our surroundings, of paths in our classroom where students are. We want to keep in mind positioning. Remember, we're staying next to the student when possible, facing the same direction. Protecting our midline. We want to wear safe clothing. And we want to provide safe physical support, that hand under hand support that we talked about in our open comm when possible. We're going to be aware of signals and triggers, the things in the environment or that the student does that tell us behavior could occur. We're going to call for help. Your team's always available. Call for help whenever you feel you may need that help. Remember your ABCs of behavior and think about those. How can I help, you know, behavior does happen. How can I help support that better in the future? Reinforcement. Does the student want what you have bad enough to do what you're asking? Right? Remember, have fun, be engaging, be silly. You'll look silly with the rest of us, and kids are going to love that, and they're going to engage with you because of it. Making sure that we are using supportive responses, helping students communicate what they want or what they need if they're agitated, telling them in a supportive way what you want them to do, and also monitor for safety at all times. So with that, I think you are ready to go. We want to thank you for joining us this summer. ESY will be a success because of you. We are so thankful for you for choosing to help our students grow and learn this summer. If you have any questions about anything we shared today, be sure to ask any of the team members that are there with you or those who are on site throughout the duration of ESY.